As an interim, what we did, like with Orchard Park a few years ago, we did a bigger road section patch to try to find us to what Adam's proposing now. Give us a few more years to.
I wasn't that one patch, was it?
Yeah.
It was a section.
It was a section.
Raised, I mean, it's a curve up on stuff on the show.
Okay, otherwise, no for me.
All right.
Okay, we'll take that as guidance and I'll come back with some, proposals here, in our meetings.
All right. James, all yours.
Well, thank you. So before you is kind of a draft presentation, which is a summary of the needs assessment. I was thinking that we could kind of go through the presentation slides, and then if we have questions or comments on any of the slides, bring them up right there, and I can make notes on the slide if we need to make some necessary changes. And then, again, if you've gone through some of this and have some comments or questions on that, if we have time after going through the slides, we can go through the book and.
Could you level set, obviously Matt and I have been on the journey with you for a while, but kind of level set, like what the intent of the draft is tonight, and then at the council, we're gonna talk about it just high level, you don't have to go into detail, but.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so what I wanted to get in front of everybody was the draft of the needs assessment and also the draft of the presentation. We'll get those released here this week if we don't have too many changes that need to happen to them. The reason, and then tonight at council, I really want to discuss how we're gonna move forward, for the next meeting, as we talked about and then at the June meeting, making some decisions as to what track we might go down from there. So tonight's meeting is gonna kind of be more of, at least at the council meeting, more of a process of, trying to get some input from our residents. We have comment cards and we have online stuff that we'll release, and those will be emailed to myself and Nola. We'll get those added in there and ready for the council meeting by a deadline. And then we'll have some kind of, hopefully going forward at the next meeting, we have some kind of, process laid out to say, we can have Orono residents talk, and we can read some of the other ones that come in after the deadline for the packet, and then kind of go from there. Recommend probably an hour's worth of, comments and questions and stuff along those lines. So, and then council can talk out at that the 22nd meeting, obviously, and then we'll go through the presentation at that time, and then kind of try and make some recommendations going forward for the next council meeting. That's what the direction is from council.
So I guess in the big picture, first of all, the needs assessment, what we tried to do based on what we discussed several months ago is this is a look at what do we think the city of Orono needs, what its residents need for fire and emergency services. So that's what the intent of this report is. It can then obviously be used for negotiations and everything else we want to do, but that's at the essence of what this is. And as James mentioned in our timeline, what we're trying to do today, right now, is walk through using our draft slides with council to get your initial thoughts and give you some initial information on that. The draft needs assessment has been published with tonight's council packet, so it is out for the public to also provide us comments. I would say, while we're going through tonight, if you please keep your comments or questions kind of high level. If you have, I know some folks have already submitted, and thank you very much. If you have particulars about, hey, I don't think the wording in paragraph 3.6.3 makes sense, please just email that to James after this meeting, and we can go through and do that.
I found a pretty good one for part-time employee or part-time firefighters and part-time firefighters.
Well, they might like that.
And then so the intent then is then to start the meeting on the 22nd, that council action with an actual formal presentation to the public, and then talk about what the rest of that is.
Well, I think hopefully, because obviously this is new to you guys, is that after Matt and I seeing the length of the assessment and then knowing the presentation, this will be the first time for you guys all to see it. We wanted to give you plenty of time to even say, like, oh, could you address this in the full presentation? And also giving residents some time to actually let it sit for a bit and actually formulate their questions, because it's a lot to digest. I mean, we've been looking at it for a bit, everybody else does, so. That was a little bit the intent, so if you're wondering why, we got this out early and it's a draft, is because, there could be areas where like we need more clarity or even a different thing about it, so.
So the work session is to talk about the slides, high level, this document, and then item 23 in the regular meeting is not the time for high level questions about the needs assessment.
It could be, the main thing that we're looking for, the main thing we're looking for in the regular session tonight, though, is, approval or agreement on what the process is
Right.
for moving from here to some kind of decision.
Yeah.
Because we did add, Matt and I did add, and Mike, the ability to do some online questions and give people other avenues, so we want to give you your feedback on that part too.
But definitely, if there is some high-level questions on just what's in here too, feel free as well.
All right, so the first slide, what we wanted to talk about here on this particular slide was more of the history of the Orono Fire Service. How many different fire departments have been serving Orono since it was incorporated in the 50s, and contracts go back to the 60s. And then we've kind of laid out kind of the timeline as they've kind of morphed over the next 60 years to where we are today, and the fire service changes that have happened, all for reasons that Orono is looking to improve their fire coverage areas. The study that was done back in 1980 was about response times and trying to make sure that the response times were adequate, and they moved some boundaries because they found that some were not, and so they did, for the best of their citizens, they moved some boundaries between Long Lake and Wayzata. And then in that study, it also mentioned the ability to put in a Station 2 down in the bar. So that was 1980 when they first started talking about that ability to improve that coverage area down in that section of the city of Orono. So, what's that on that one? Was there anything else on that one? If I remember right?
No, I think that this is hopefully just kind of shows you the evolution of fire coverage, right? So it's changed over time. There were times when, we had Wayzata, Excelsior, Eagle Plain, Mound. Also, you'll notice the star in there. Well, we probably should have another star. So the star in there on the timeline is actually when Orono Police Department lost coverage of the city of Long Lake. And I know that in the assessment, we talk about the synergies between fire and police. I think just for us, just as a notable, is that police service had actually been in place for 42 years. So just to give you some historical context of just kind of the changes in coverage over time. So this isn't the first time, that city would look at this. So just to give you guys context.
I don't want to jump the gun, but I'm wondering if in the timeline or history here, is this specific and focused on Orono Long Lake only, or is it also, will it address other municipalities historically?
It talks about the different municipalities that have serviced the area and the little bullet points underneath. Like the first one from 60 to 1980. We've had Long Lake, Wayzata, Maple Plain, and Mound Fire Department, and then kind of moving Wayzata out due to some changes in response times, and then moving Maple Plain out a little bit, and then having Excelsior covering the Station 2 call area. So it does talk a little bit about other departments, but really, truly, this is all based off of the city of Orono and what fire service was and what the needs assessment is going to show what it can.
Okay, but it's not, this timeline won't include specifics of what other municipalities are handling fire just at this time in this area. Not getting into that.
No, this is focused on Orono and
Orono only?
who's provided service to the city of Orono.
Great.
And that kind of is, again, in keeping with the theme of the needs assessment is how do we provide these services for our residents here in this city?
As we go to the next slide, this is more just kind of a summary of the current situation. The contract expires, what we're paying as compared to what we're using. This is what we're budgeting in 23 for fire service, which includes the contractual obligations with Long Lake. So the additional debt service that we have for the bond that we took out, equipment investments, and then myself too. And we go through kind of other things that we've talked about in here, about the current fleet at or near end of life, per NFPA guidelines, capital fund being underfunded. Currently, there's no defined response standard, that's been agreed upon by any of the cities. We talk about recruitment and retention challenges, and then we talk about the different deployment models where we're paging everybody out for each call, and that can lead to some inefficiency on the deployment of personnel, or it does lead to inefficiency on the deployment of personnel, so.
Is this going to address, any complaints in the area about fire service, or if there are any or not?
It would if there were any. I've not received any complaints about fire service, and I think we've said that all along, that there's never been any issue with the service of the Long Lake Fire Department. I mean, Mayor, I think we've said it, and that we've been very happy with the service to that point, which is similar to what, with the police contract, I'm talking to Corey about that too, when they made their change, there was no issue with the service of the Orono Police Department when they made that change.
And the same thing with Maple Plain and Mountain and Excelsior, I mean, the service was very good there too, we just, things changed and consolidated, and we just did something different. And those contracts.
Exactly.
I have one more question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Talk about anything historically with the underfunded, CIP? I know it's currently underfunded, but do you go into some detail about how that occurred or why?
No, not in this presentation, and I'd have to think in the needs assessment, I think we just talk about the contract and the agreed current level of funding. I don't think we go into any other detail of that, so. And so the next slide, we asked the question of, why start in Orono Municipal Fire Department? We go through the reasons, why we've gone down this path. Orono is committed to the best possible service for its citizens, well positioned to manage and fund long-term, local control for the services used, improved level of service if we, start, actively, approving a suburban and urban response time.
Which is a definition.
What was that, I'm sorry?
Suburban/urban response time is a fire definition.
Correct, yeah, exactly. Comes
Versus
right out
the
of
rural,
NFPA.
versus the rural
Versus the
response
rural
time.
response time, exactly. Comes right out of NFPA 1720, and 1710, so. Yeah, so. Questions on that slide at all that anybody would have or would like to add, or? I'll add in there about the definition and where it comes from, absolutely.
It's just a talking point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you have the actual, the breakdown and the graph on
The next slide, yeah.
Yep.
I have another question. So
Yeah,
why
absolutely.
start in municipal fire? Are you gonna talk about the context again about what other municipalities are doing, or what the trends are in the state?
No, we're just focusing on the city of Orono and what their needs are. Anything else on that slide? The next one talks about, firefighter duty crews. We talk about, daytime response, especially down at Station 2, which is addressed in here. And how it doesn't even meet the rural response times if we just take Station 2 alone. Overall, when we paged out both stations, it is meeting the rural response time, but as you can see in this map, it's not colored, but when it comes into the color section of it, the Station 2 color is more urban and suburban, and the majority of it's urban and suburban than rural. So, we talk about, in here, in the needs assessment, we identified out 4 different categories of calls: fires, medicals, alarms, which are fire alarms and others. And 71% of our calls are fire alarms and medicals. And those can be handled by a duty crew of about 4 to be able to take care of 71% of those calls. So that's a considerable amount. Right now we average about 13.28 firefighters, not about, but we do average 13.2 firefighters per medical over the last 9 years, and 11 firefighters per fire alarm over the last 9 years. So.
That is a lot of floors.
Right, exactly. If you start calculating that's what we were talking about on the slide before, the efficient use of personnel or deployment of personnel. If we can, not have to page everybody out. If we have a duty crew or somebody that can take care of the majority of those calls, that leads to better use of everybody's time.
So do you know, and this might be helpful to go in here, so on the corner we have the response times for urban, suburban, and rural. Do we have what the actual response time is for Station 2?
Yeah,
And then
we can add it in there.
Let's add, can we add that in there? And I don't know if it differs per day, but
It definitely differs for day. Day is much worse than the evenings and the nights and weekends.
Okay, because I know that's one of the reasons why Minnetonka Beach actually made the change to using the bar station, is they knew the response times would, I mean, just geographically, when you look at it versus mountain would be better, so I think that would help residents to know what the current state is, and what we would be striving towards, by making some of those changes.
So we can do workday versus weekend or something like that.
Just current data on what it is.
James, would be 6A to 6B should we focus on?
Yeah, that's what I've been kind of using as the workday. In the needs analysis, you can see our calls start to ramp up right around 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, and then they peak in the late afternoon, and then after about 8 o'clock, they just drop it down.
So is this also, we're gonna talk about what's currently lacking in the current system about being on call and why you're wanting to move to this model of the duty crews?
Yeah, so the talking points kind of below are for improved recruitment and retention, improved deployment. We can add in there a bullet or two about some other improvements for the individuals, the firefighters.
So just to be clear, this is not something that's currently happening with fire service?
Not in our area.
Not in the duty
No.
crews?
No, not with the long
So,
range
so
fire.
maybe just even be super clear, like current state.
It's, no,
But-
yeah,
Our neighbors, some of our neighbors do this.
Yeah. Minnetonka,
Which one?
Minnetonka does,
So-
Zelda does,
One.
there's a whole bunch of them.
And again, in order to have duty crews, Orono has to have its own fire department. That's not something that's been entertained with Long Lake Fire.
No, when I was fire chief, we introduced it, we were gonna do a trial run back in 2020 for the summer, which you probably know. And, with what happened over COVID, we just scrapped that and never came back to it at that point in time, so. Any other questions on that? During COVID, daytime response improved a little bit. We had more people working from home for the next 2.5 years, or a year and a half, so. So you saw some improvement there. We had people that actually worked from the station, used our Wi-Fi or used our facility, to do some of their work when they were working at home. So they were able to then hop on the truck even quicker, which was fantastic. Alright, so the next slide kind of just lays out the 4 different courses of action that we came up with as a group. Course of action 1 is Orono would assume control of the existing Long Lake Fire Department and really not make any changes whatsoever with contract or personnel or anything like that. Course of action 2 is the taxable fire district, the joint powers agreement as it was laid out back in January at the fire service meeting. Course of action 3 is an Orono municipal department with just strictly paid on call firefighters. And then course of action 4 is the Orono municipal department with the duty crews and full-time, kind of goal for some full-time staff down the road. So staff recommends, as we went through the analysis, course of action 4.
And when you say staff, is that you yourself, director of planning?
Yeah, so it's Adam's been in the meetings, Ron's been in the meetings, and myself, and then the recruitment, or the negotiating committee has been in those meetings too, but these recommendations were made by staff themselves. And kind of the next slides, we just go through each one of the different courses of action. And we've got on here, we've got a description of what it is. We've got the cost that is currently being paid and anything extra that needs to be paid, and then kind of the average cost per household. We lay out some of the pros and the cons of each one of those. So for like this specific one, this is the one where Orono would assume control of an existing fire department. Currently there's the cost of that is $895,000 per year plus any negotiated expenses with Long Lake. We laid out some of the costs of the most recent Long Lake offer, which would add about $371,000 per year to Orono's costs. And then we broke it down as we had in the needs assessment, kind of on an average cost per Orono household as to what that would cost per household. This one costs $280 And then with the most recent offer, that would add another $116 per household for that. So some of the pros, obviously this is the least expensive. It does improve synergy, all of these except for the Jacksonville district, improve synergies with the Orono Police Department. And then we are able to kind of access some of the administrative support from the other resources the city of Orono has. The cons to this one, still this one is based off the underfunded capital. So the fleet and facilities remain underfunded and unsustainable over time. Response model doesn't change, that would still be more of a rural response model. And then the Orono residents disproportionate resources so that we use more than what we're paying for in this model still too. Or paying for more, yes, exactly.
So maybe, just thinking forward here on
Yeah.
a potential slide to insert here is, or where it fits, I guess you can decide, but I think there's two sides of the operational budget and its costs, and then the other side of that is the CIP and its costs, right? And we need to make it clear that the exceptional CIP burden that we have is coming no matter what course of action we take. We extended this existing contract, but that's not enough. But if we did, we have a tremendous CIP
Sure.
responsibility because the equipment is so aged. And so that's gonna be one thing that we're gonna have to be effective at communicating to people is that this expense is coming regardless of all of our options. The other side of this is which is the best operational choice for our city and how does the operational side, but CIP doesn't change regardless of what our options are as far as expense, because under our current model, we pay for 85% of the equipment, but it gets used by more than our portion, right? So if we paid 100% of that equipment, that equipment would last longer if it was just servicing Orono. So, somewhere in here, I think we have to do a very specific job of bringing that to everyone.
Okay.
So we did try to lay that out in the course of action descriptions in the actual document, but we can try to add something to the slides as well.
Yeah, I think I'm just, as I was thinking through this, it'd be something to contemplate, but it just seems to me that doesn't change no matter what course of action and addressing it out front and letting people know that we have, we've got a lot of money
We
in.
have significant capital costs coming up regardless.
Regardless.
And that's one of the things, and maybe this ordering of the COAs as we have them, like, be better served in a different order. So one of the reasons to keep the course of action one in here is kind of a baseline to compare everything else to.
Right.
I mean, we're never gonna recommend that we go down a path that continues to underfund, facilities and equipment. So, the comparison is, one of the comparisons is right now is we have the course of action 1, course of action 3, because the main difference between those two courses of action, is the fact that it's,
Yeah.
it's,
Course of
the
action
capital is
3.
funded, at a rate that's sustainable.
Right.
Right.
And
Kind of
it's
illustrate that,
compliant
we
within
think that's
10
kind
years.
of what you have to do that.
You're saying, I do have a couple, so you're saying that there's no impact on capital if we stand up our own station versus partner with other municipalities, or maybe in this contract, capital outlays gonna be the same in those scenarios?
Yeah, if you start looking at what the needs are and start following the recommendations based off of it, capital needs are very similar, absolutely.
And you mentioned something about police synergy. Do you have more information on that? Is it difficult right now with the way Orono PD communicates or is actively, collaborating with the fire?
So just being over here and being in City Hall, I've had multiple officers stop by and say, get to talking about, what training we could do and maybe some different props that we could share and put those out, between the two departments to be able to share and stuff like that. And that never happened in the past. So, to just being here, I've seen the improved synergy between the two departments.
And also, we mentioned that here just because we're now co-located. But then there's even a different level of synergy improvements if you go to like, an example of duty crew, which we can get to in a minute. Where now instead of the police being, first on scene for medical, we now have the opportunity to have, a higher level trained medical person from our fire department be first on scene.
Any other questions?
Not on this.
Okay. So the next one was the taxable fire district of the joint powers. We described kind of that. We go through the costs. The difference between these two costs, the first one, is without duty crews or full-time people, it's just a paid-on-call model. So that's the cost to Orono. And then the second line item would be the cost of Orono if they had some sort of duty crews, and full-time people, with their joint powers. So, the pros to something like this, obviously, in the future, there's the possibility of having cost avoidance. You can get rid of some of the duplicate backup engines and those types of things. You also have a larger crew of firefighters to pull from for your duty crews. Obviously, the cons to this one, again, disproportionate to services provided, right? So, as we laid out, or as was laid out at the fire service meeting in January, there were 11 cities. Orono ended up being 34% of the market value, but only using, according to what I found for everybody's calls when I queried each one of the chiefs, only using about 22% of the services. So we'd be in a worse position from a pay per service situation than we are right now, from that perspective. Again, no local control, little oversight as to where capital and operational expenses go. And I'm not sure if they're gonna change response times or not, but the majority of that area is a rural response, so I'm sure they'll change some of it, but not all of it. Questions on that one? All right, so course of action 3, similar to course of action 1, but on this particular one, we would actually fund capital to meet NFPA standards within the first 10 years. So that's the difference. The first cost of the 978 is the cost with partners, and the $1,357,000 per year would be the cost of Orono going at it alone. So you got the difference, the average cost between the households there from 306 to 424. Some of the pros to this one, least impactful to the, less impactful to the firefighters, because we keep everybody together, local control, improved emergency service coordination. Obviously, this one has sustainable capital. Cons, obviously, increased costs. There's still some recruiting challenge with the paid-on-call model. And that model is kind of a waning model that is going to, or is becoming unsustainable. Still the rogue response performance, inefficient model of use of personnel. And this one, we would have a harder time trying to phase in a switch from Long Lake to Orono on this particular model. Because of, if we would do Station 2, it's just strictly because of the response issues out of Station 2 during the day. We would have to have either full-time or duty crews out of that area, so be able to fix it. Questions on this one? Yeah. Course of action 4, this is the one that staff kind of picked out to recommend. It made the most sense. You can see the description. We'll have daytime duty crews along with paid-on-call volunteers to augment some of the part-time people that we'll be hiring. The initial cost, if it's Orono and partners, we use kind of the 3 partners that we have currently with Long Lake. And then a different model would be League of Minnesota Cities model would be $1,177,000. If Orono went at it alone, it would be $1,633,000 per year. So the cost per households are there on the right. The pros, obviously local control, improved level of response, improved fire safety education, because we could utilize our duty crews to do some of that. Better health for our firefighters. We're not paging them all out for every single call, so it'll be easier on their bodies. Improved health and life safety codes, so we would use some of the duty crew people to do inspections. Obviously, the improved emergency service coordination. The big con to this one, obviously, is increased costs. From that perspective, not necessarily the increased capital, because that's going to be kind of increased all the way along, no matter which route is taken. So definitely increase in the budget side of it. Comments, questions on this one, changes? Okay. So, on the next slide, kind of the recommended courses of action. Staff kind of recommended course of action 4 and then came up kind of with a list of bullet points that we'd like to see some direction on from the council. Obviously, adapting a suburban type demand zone for a response model. Establishing daytime duty crews for staffing and making the commitment to 24/7 duty crews in the short-term future, 5 years or 10 years, 5 to 10 years. Trying to start initiating some of the apparatus and equipment purchases for 23 to see if we can get it delivered in 24 and 25. With the longer lead time items, trying to get those ordered as quick as possible, or having to look at some sort of used apparatus for their place. Adopting that League of Minnesota Cities kind of model for contract for services that we talked about. It's a third land value, a third population, a third call hours. For any partners that might want to come over to the Orono Fire Department. And we would ask that we direct the negotiating team kind of to go back and start talking about the disposition of Station 1. 100% Orono ownership, or establish a shared ownership use agreement. And then also talk about some of the other equipment, the tenders, the donated fleet, the SCBA's, turnout equipment, tools, that type of stuff. So, you know, part of this course of action could be a phased-in course of action. You know, we could phase in by moving Station 2 call area early. That would be course of action 4A, which would start June 1st, or July 1st of 2024 possibly. Or waiting until the end of the contract, which would be 4B. So as we go to the other slides, we talk about the different recommendations on 4A and 4B. They don't change a ton, but there's a timeline that kind of goes with each one of those slides. That kind of shows what the significant milestones would have to, when they'd have to be hit. Any questions on at least the recommended course of action piece of it before we move on?
So one thing, and this is probably for all the courses of action, is there's the cost per resident, but I think, I'm gonna assume that residents are gonna wanna know, you know, what that would do on their, like, their actual taxes, right? And it's probably two questions, right? So operationally, can we absorb that without affecting the tax rate? So I guess that's to you, Ron, is for each of those course of actions, can it be covered, right? Because obviously it's important to know what the cost per household is, but if people don't see a change,
Sure.
and they're getting different or better service, right, whichever route we decide to go, it's a different topic than if they see a big increase. I also think the second part, that we need to talk about is that there's that operational yearly cost, right, for each of those, but then there is that, CIP early numbers to catch up, right? What does that look like? And then what is that, like, list of equipment that, I don't wanna call it bare minimum, but like the stuff you have to have, and what do we think that's gonna cost? Cause I think there's two numbers, right, for each of those, cause I think, if I'm a resident,
Some of that is in the needs assessment, the actual book. We have an annex that shows kind of the capital plan. Did we include any of the equipment in that? I can't remember, Ron, you
Well,
remember?
these numbers are operational and capital combined.
So,
For each course of action, you see the,
but we don't tell, but we're not actually telling the residents, I get what you're saying, but we're not actually, like, I don't know come next year what the cost is gonna be. That's great, that the cost X.
What you're saying is, we, with the funds that we've got set aside already, we don't know if it's gonna really increase anything at all. But
Yeah.
this is the increased cost of just running the service in general. That doesn't mean that there'll be an increased cost on any of the taxes.
Yeah, I think we have to get that information for each one.
I was gonna, maybe I'm asking this in a similar but maybe different way, a little forward thinking. I guess the question, the most simply I can put it, and again, it's for Ron maybe as well, is what's the total cost of ownership for this project? Starting when our contract with Long Lake ends, moving out 10 years, I'd say, what is the total cost of ownership for this project? That's what I'm interested in.
Operational and capital together.
Correct. Total cost of ownership for what is course of action number 4. Projected out 10 years, that's what
Yeah,
I'm
so
interested in, versus what we are currently under contract or could continue, you know, that's what I'm interested in knowing, because I'll be honest here, I'm not an expert in fire services, I think I probably said that to most folks in this room. When we're talking about a ladder truck here, or a pumper truck, or turnout here, it becomes a lot to take in, so I'm trying to simplify for my benefit and for the residents. If we could talk into the total cost of ownership now, 10 years out, that would be great to see.
And I think you can't get it all, it's not a one number issue, because the cost of the capital to outfit it, we've already said is gonna be the same regardless. It's just the operational cost to go from only a duty crew to doing it the way we believe is gonna be best served to our residents. That would be the only difference.
Well, just however it needs to be.
Right, I'm just talking out loud, that
Sure.
it's not just one number, because it's the one number to outfit the trucks, whatever you wanna call the equipment, is the same, which Matt had brought up earlier, it's the same, and you had said too, either way, it's just what's the other cost, saying if you wanna stay, go to, option one, and you do nothing, and everything's going, and you stay with the duty crews, which is unsustainable, this is our cost. The incremental cost would be really X, that's really what we're looking at. And then to your point, which we still have to meet around finance, move here shortly, to talk about what, because we have been putting the money aside for all this in our budget already, there may be no impact whatsoever, and that's the big,
I mean, if I'm, that's, at least, that was what I would want to know, like, and especially if you're telling me, okay, so we're gonna have duty crews, and I'm gonna, for my part, I'm gonna have 5 minutes of response time, and it's not gonna cost me more. Why would I not do it?
Right.
So I think that we gotta do that, I think there's a run rate, once we get equipment kind of leveled off, like what's the run rate for equipment, to your point, 10 years out, like what does that look like, cause that will be I think we need to be clear, it may be clear to us, but I don't know if it's gonna be clear to them.
Right, so just so you know, so that's what these numbers are. These are the steady state, more of the steady state numbers. There is, in some of these, the numbers aren't shown, but, there's the plus additional costs. So no matter what way we go, there's, if anything that's transition, there's obviously a little bump in the next couple of years. So if you decide to do course of action number 4, we still have fees we need to pay for that, for our existing contract, plus these numbers. What we try to do in these numbers is show you, hey, around 2026, this is what it starts costing you. And to answer your question about 10 years, add a 0. That's the way we calculate the numbers we're showing you in the slides is we looked at the total 10-year cost, we divided by 10, and then came up with an annual cost.
Anything that can be done to reflect that in the presentation would be helpful.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think it would be important to have a slide too, which would be in the making still, of what the actual impact, what we already have in the budget set aside for that, so any impact, if any, is what would be.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful.
Also, again,
The one thing that would be very difficult to do, just because kind of to Victoria's point, is showing an individual resident what it does to them, because everything is based on what their property value is.
Right.
Yeah, for sure, but I think that what we can do is look at,
We can look at the average.
or we can look at what we have for a budget, right? And do we need a bigger, right? Like, that's the question.
We've already got the average cost for a household is $280 right now, and they're just the basic model that's there.
Yeah, right, and that's the reason we included that, but it is very much an average, right? So if you have a $5 million home, it's more than that. If you have a $100,000 home, it's less than that.
But I think that's an easy thing to compare to, that people can grasp on and say, okay, if it's $280 right now, and to do plan number 4A is $531, and in our budget, and that's a difference of, $250. In our budget, we've already got 200 as an example, so the increase is only $50. Sure. And what you get with that is, so 9-minute response time to your medical, which is 7 of the budget, you
So
get
that's
5-minute
making no
response
sense. I
time.
don't know if
And you
it's-
get a paramedic in front of you and not somebody from an ambulance who says 60 hours of training for their stuff.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, and I think it does need to be broken down. I mean, our residents are, we said it in this room before, and we said it again tonight, there have been no complaints. So if that's the baseline that we're making decisions from, and residents are used to having a certain expectation of service for that, a certain cost, we need to be able to explain what's gonna change in the cost.
And what they're gonna get for that delta, right? I mean, what they're gonna get for that delta.
I'm sorry.
What they're going to get for that delta direction.
and what the change room is gonna be. Because again, I am understanding there's different, operational capital, that sort of thing, but this is something that's just really, it is complex and it's very important to be able to reduce the complexity down, to be able to explain to residents, in a way that is comprehensive and in a way that gives people a very good idea of what they're, what's in store financially, service-wise and everything. So, yep.
Okay.
That's all I have.
So with this feedback, when will we see the updated version, or how will we go about seeing it?
Our intent is to bring that to the, May 22nd regular council meeting.
So if you think of things between now and then.
Yeah, so that's what I was saying at the beginning, we're gonna start taking public comment or public questions, tomorrow online, if you tell us that's what you wanna do here in the meeting. But again, if any of you all have specific questions or comments on the actual document, please send those to James over the next week, and we'll be sure to address those in the document. So,
You can either email me directly, or you can go to the website, there'll be a link to a form, that the residents and citizens will be able to fill out. So it's a pretty quick and easy name, are you a resident, address, and urgent questions.
Well, a lot went into this, so good job.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank Ron and Adam for helping out with this, and you too also. It's a lot of time for this stuff.
Alright, 15 minutes.
Place organized and, great.
That's what I can cut that, the slide up here.